Hi everybody, welcome to your Chapter 13 lecture and the final lecture of the semester. So Chapter 13 focuses on uses and effects of digital entertainment. So this is where we're going to really get into the media effects. And media effects are those that influence your cognitive, affective, or behavioral parts of you. So cognitive, it makes you think about stuff. Affective is how it affects your emotions, and behavioral is how it affects what you do. So, unfortunately, a lot of media effects comes from tragedy. So think about the mass shootings and what ends up happening in the media when there is some sort of a school shooting or a mass shooting of some form. What happens is the media starts asking questions about the person who commits the crime. So, who are they? What were they like? What TV shows did they watch? What movies did they watch? What video games did they play? This is most prevalent with school shootings, or shootings that occur with younger people, because they want to find a direct link between the shooting and the media that they watch, to say that if they played Call of Duty, then that must have influenced them to act out violently and to shoot. But as you'll see as we go through these studies, it's not always that simple. So most media research is based on moral panic. And this concept has been around forever. It can be traced back to book burnings in as early as 300 AD. And what happens is people just get really upset by something and they react in an open way. And usually that reaction is censorship, hence book burnings. A couple of the reasons why media effects studies came to be are Nazi war propaganda, because researchers wanted to understand how Hitler was able to come to power and to get so many people behind him and his personal goals of war. But also here in America, in 1938, there was a radio broadcast of War of the Worlds. And this was a dramatization. And people thought it was real. And we'll talk about why in a few minutes. But I do have some clips for you to watch that's a documentary of the video, or of the War of the Worlds. And it also gives you some clips from the original broadcast. So the very first theory that came out of media effects studies was looking at a direct effect, and it was called the magic bullet theory. And what it stated was simply that if people see this media, it will directly affect them. So that concept that if you play Call of Duty, you will shoot people. You will then act out violently. But what we found over time is that's just not true. That it's more indirect. And we have this theory called the paper tiger. And basically what it says is that a picture of a tiger may be kind of scary looking, but it really can't do anything to you. So there's more to it than just watch this, do this, done. There's something more to it. The effects are more indirect. Through this chapter, you'll also learn about embedded journalism, which is when journalists are with the combat units themselves and they're reporting from the combat zone. The early reports that came from embedded units were about the people. They were about the soldiers. They were making it the war more real. It wasn't just about casualty counts or troop movements. It was about the people. The current approach it's a more selective effect, and it's based on individual differences. So number one, it's whether or not you have a fatalist personality. And a fatalist personality is someone who doesn't believe they have any control of their surroundings or what happens around them. It depends on education level, if there are reinforcing coincidental events, or if you miss key broadcast messages. So a personal experience that I had, one of my first semesters here, I was watching Netflix and a storm blew in, and it was pretty ugly. It was really dark out, wind kicked up really bad, and at the exact same time, I hear the tornado siren blow. And I'm freaked because I've never lived anywhere with a tornado before. So I quick flipped to TV. It just so happens that one of the weather people broke in and said, yes, we have this crazy storm blowing, but in case you missed it earlier, the tornado sirens are not for a tornado, they're a test. And we announced it over time that these tests were coming. I missed those key broadcasts. So because, reinforcing coincidental event, I heard the sirens blow and we have a dark and windy storm brewing, I automatically went tornado. Now relate this to War of the Worlds. In War of the Worlds, they announced before the broadcast that this was a dramatization. It was not a real news broadcast. People missed that. So they missed a key broadcast message. Then, because it was 1938, so education levels weren't what they are now. So people tended to believe what they heard a little more. And there was really not a way to double check the information like we have now. Because now, like I said, I could flip the channel from Netflix and see the news report happening right then and there. There was no TV in 1938. You had to wait for the newspaper the next day, or you had to wait for another news broadcast on the radio. And then the reinforcing coincidental events were that in some areas there was a power outage. So that added to people's fears that, oh my word, we are actually being invaded by Martians because the power went out. The sad part about War of the Worlds is there were people that committed suicide because they believed the messages to be true. And this is why you get media effects studies. Building on to that idea of moral panic, we turn to obscenity, and the Comstock Act of 1873 prohibited the mailing of indecent material. So anything that was deemed indecent could not be mailed through the U.S. Postal Service. Make sure you understand the three-pronged Miller test and how it works. Basically, and this is part of homework for this week, you have to meet all three requirements in order for something to be truly deemed obscene. And number one, you have whether the average person applying current contemporary community standards would find that the work taken as a whole appeals to the prurient interest. So basically, it has to be about the whole exhibit. So if you're talking about an art exhibit, it's the entire exhibit. You can't pick and choose 2 or 3 pictures and say, oh, this is offensive because of these 2 pictures. It has to be taken as a whole. Part 2 is whether the work depicts or describes in a patently offensive way sexual conduct specifically defined by applicable state law. So does it violate state law in a truly patently offensive way? Then finally, whether the work taken as a whole, again, lacks serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. So again, taken as a whole, does it lack some sort of value to the community? Years and years ago, there was an exhibit by an artist named Mapplethorpe, and some of the pictures depicted nudity. This caused a big uprise, and people wanted the exhibit shut down simply because of the nude pictures involved. However, when you take that as a whole, it was deemed to have artistic value. When you look at the body exhibit, which is a series of cadavers showing the human body at different points, the circulatory system, the skeletal system, reproductive systems, people flipped out because the cadavers were naked. And one of the cadavers was a pregnant woman, and there was a fetal cadaver included in the exhibit because the idea was to show the entirety of the human body. And this exhibit still is up in some areas, and it was deemed appropriate for scientific value. So you have to, in order for something to fail the Miller test, it has to meet all 3 criteria. Some other prominent media effects have to do with sex and the rape myth. And the rape myth is the belief that a woman, that most reports of rape are false, and that the woman was asking for it because of the way she acted, the way she was dressed. So it's that belief that there really isn't rape. That if you wear a short skirt and you dance really close to a guy and you have sex, you can't call rape, which is just not true. And there is a push in social marketing campaigns against that, to put the onus of responsibility on the men, to say, hey, it doesn't matter if she's wearing a short skirt. That doesn't mean that you can have sex with her. No means no. Other prominent media effects to consider, sex in the new media. This is why we have age authentication. Make sure you understand the Communications Decency Act. And age authentication is when you go to a site, say you go to the Coors Light website or the Coors website, you have to type in your birth date to say, yes, I am 21. So it's okay for me to see this site for beer. It goes that way for sexual content as well. So pornography sites, you have to type in your birth date, and that's age authentication. I give you an example of a recent ad campaign that was from last spring. Bud Light had their hashtag Up For Whatever program, and they had a label that said, the perfect beer for removing no from your vocabulary for the night. And this perpetuates rape culture. It perpetuates that myth. Most recently, you can see advertisements from Bloomingdale's that are being questioned. And there was just a company in Singapore that for a Black Friday sale, their Shop Now button said rape us now instead. And that all just adds to that myth and that culture. Then we also have antisocial effects and pro-social effects. One of the most commonly studied media effects is that of violence, and studies done using an experimental design. The counter arguments to that, because a lot of people believe, again, that watching violent content or using or playing violent games will make you violent. The counter argument is that increased aggression does not necessarily result in increased violent behavior. Think about social learning theory, and it takes motivation to act out violently. Just because you see it doesn't mean you're going to do it, and that varies through age. Reports of influence of violent media on violent action is invalid to some extent by a decline in violent crime rates. If you look at crime statistics in most areas, violent crime is going down. And violent people are more likely to seek violent media content. So there's some propensity towards violence in some people that makes them seek out violent material and then act out violently. And it's a small number of people that do. Making media interactive should make violence effects stronger, right? Well, on the yes side, video games require us to learn and rehearse violence. However, those same video games require us to think about and learn from our actions. We actually play them based on our own morals. So you do think about what the ramifications of shooting that person are. Make sure you understand cultivation theory, which simply states that viewers are likely to believe what they see. So if they constantly see something happening over and over again, they're going to believe that that's how the world really works. And then we also have the mean world effect, which says that heavy TV viewers believe the world is far more dangerous than low TV viewers. So if you are constantly seeing if you're watching a lot of TV in general, you're more likely to believe that crime is worse than it actually is. Also understand racism and the parasocial contact hypothesis, which says that exposure to outgroups via media may combat potential cultivation effects. So by not putting individuals in stereotypical scenarios, you can combat some of that belief. So some of the belief might be that, like right now, that all Muslims are terrorists, which is just not the case. So if you put a person of Muslim faith in the role of a police officer, that can help counteract some of that belief that they are a terrorist, instead of always casting them in the role of terror. Other prominent media effects also include the anti-socialization and the displacement hypothesis, which says entertainment media usage is a socially isolating activity, and as we learned early on in the semester, that it's just not the case. We are actually just as social with the extent of technology that we have at our fingertips than we ever were. The pro-social effects are we have edutainment and public health and safety campaigns, and edutainment combines education with entertainment. So you may have a video game that helps a child who has just been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes to remember to take their medicine, to remember to eat right. I have a video clip in the lecture that talks about a game to encourage entrepreneurship. That would be edutainment. And then there's meaningfulness and appreciation reactions to antisocial content. And there's a cool trailer to a movie called A Day in the Life that shows the joy of life and shows the meaningfulness within life. So that's it for chapter 13. Sorry, this video is a little bit long, but there's a lot to cover in here. I hope you have a great week, and good luck.